El Chapo, the infamous leader of the Sinaloa cartel, has long been known for his terrifying violence and unrelenting cruelty. His reign of terror was marked by a relentless pursuit of power. He enforced his insatiable hunger for dominance through a series of horrific tortures and executions which his rivals were subject to. Recently, new and chilling evidence of his brutality has come to light. In a shocking revelation, videos shared online depicting El Chapo's most depraved actions have surfaced, offering a glimpse into the depths of his sadistic mind. Torture victims. Among the most infamous cartel leaders is Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the notorious leader of the Sinaloa cartel. Guzman's reign of terror was marked by acts so horrific they defy comprehension. One such incident, now revealed in newly released court documents, illustrates the depths of his sadism. In 2010, El Chapo reportedly ordered the torture of a rival cartel member, Israel Rincon. This wasn't a mere act of violence, it was a calculated display of power and cruelty. According to an unnamed informant, Guzman's men tied Rincon to a chair in a garden outhouse where they electrocuted his ear and pulled out his teeth. The torture was so severe that Rincon eventually lost consciousness. But for El Chapo, this was not the end. A doctor was summoned to revive Rincon, ensuring he could endure further torment. This heinous act was recorded and disseminated on YouTube and other internet sites. It was a gruesome message to all who opposed Guzman. The brutality continued until Rincon was killed, his remains discarded in the city of Culiacan. This incident was just one of many that highlighted the ruthless methods employed by the cartels to maintain control and instill fear. The story of Felix, a young Honduran migrant, further illustrates the pervasive violence in Mexico. His hellish ordeal at the hands of the Zeta cartel, one of the most feared drug gangs, sheds light on the dangers faced by migrants. Felix, whose name was changed for his safety, narrowly escaped death after being kidnapped by a policeman in collusion with the Zetas. For a week, he was tortured in a Zeta safe house, beaten with planks and pistol handles, and subjected to electric shocks. His captors forced him to scream into the phone while demanding ransom from his impoverished family. Felix's suffering didn't end there. He witnessed the torture and dismemberment of captured Gulf cartel members, their bodies mutilated and burnt to dust. The Zetas told him the same fate awaited him if his ransom wasn't paid. Miraculously, his family managed to gather $5,000, but the Zetas demanded more. When his family stopped answering their calls, Felix was moved between 6 different safe houses, crammed with other migrants, and subjected to daily beatings. Despite the relentless torture, he survived, ultimately dumped in Reynosa, barely able to walk or talk. The violence he endured left deep scars, both physical and psychological. Felix now lives in limbo, too terrified to return to Honduras and too scared to attempt crossing the U.S. border. The streets of Reynosa, rife with kidnappers and cartel battles, do little to offer any safety. In the Mexican drug war, no one is spared, not even innocent migrants seeking a better life. The brutality of the cartels is not confined to physical torture. They employ a range of gruesome methods to send messages and instill fear. One such method, horrifying in its ingenuity, is the stew, or el guiso, used by Miguel Trevino Morales, also known as Z40. Morales executed enemies by placing them in a 55-gallon drum filled with flammable liquid, setting them alight, or boiling them alive. This method ensured the victim's complete obliteration, leaving no trace. In another chilling instance, El Chapo recorded himself using a chainsaw to behead Hugo Hernandez. This gruesome act was intended to warn those who might consider betraying the cartel. Guzman didn't stop there. He removed Hernandez's face and affixed it to a soccer ball, leaving it on the steps of Ciudad Juarez's city hall. Such grisly spectacles are designed to terrify and control. The cartel's creativity and cruelty knows no bounds, as evidenced by the practice of face peeling, a particularly grotesque form of torture and intimidation. These acts serve as warnings to rivals and potential informants, ensuring a reign of terror that silences opposition and cements the cartel's power. In 2009, the world learned of another monstrous figure, Santiago Mesa Lopez, known as the Soup Maker, or El Pozolero. Lopez's gruesome role in the Tijuana cartel was to dissolve bodies in acid baths. Over 300 victims met their end this way, their bodies reduced to unrecognizable sludge. Lopez's method was meticulous. He filled a drum with water, added caustic soda, and once boiling, placed the bodies inside. This process not only disposed of the corpses, but also ensured that any trace of the victims vanished, erasing evidence of the cartel's crimes. Just when you thought things couldn't get more depraved, you get this guy, Harry Heriberto Lascano, also known as Z3, in Alaska. He took the fascination of owning pets to a whole other disturbing level, allegedly feeding his enemies to his exotic pets, lions and tigers. As the leader of the Los Zetas cartel, Lascano's acts of violence were designed not only to kill, but to entertain his brutal audience, forcing victims into cages where they met a gruesome end at the jaws of wild beasts. This horrifying spectacle was a testament to the power and savagery of Lascano's reign. In a similarly brutal display of power, Marciano Chano Milan Vasquez, an alleged hitman for the Los Zetas cartel, was involved in the 2013 kidnapping of a former drug trafficking associate. This associate later testified against Vasquez, recounting the horrific details of his captivity. Chano had taken him to an undisclosed location where he kept a family, a couple and their 6-year-old daughter, near a flaming barrel. The cartel members forced the parents to watch in horror as Vasquez dismembered the girl with an axe, throwing her limbs into the fire. He repeated this atrocity with the parents, leaving a scene of unimaginable horror. The Los Zetas cartel's brutality extended beyond individual acts of violence to mass killings. In 2010, the cartel perpetrated the San Fernando massacre, executing 72 immigrants from Central and South America and dumping their bodies in a mass grave. The following year, authorities discovered another mass grave containing 193 bodies. Investigators believe these victims were migrants attempting to cross into the United States. They were stopped and executed by the Zetas for refusing to cooperate. To further cement their control and send stark messages to rivals, Mexican cartels often display the mutilated bodies of their victims in highly visible places. Hanging rivals' corpses from bridges and billboards has become a gruesome tactic to assert dominance over disputed territories. In 2016, Mexican authorities found a body hanging from a bridge in Tijuana, just 10 miles south of the U.S. border. The victim bore a message scrawled on cardboard: "This is how all grasshoppers will be left," a chilling warning to anyone who dared to cross the cartels. El Chapo's brutality. El Chapo's reign was marked by unrelenting violence and merciless decisions. One such chilling incident illustrates the lengths to which he would go to maintain control and instill fear. A man who allegedly worked for the rival Arellano Felix cartel was brought before El Chapo. This man, blindfolded and severely tortured, bore the unmistakable signs of brutal interrogation, his skin charred and burned by a clothing iron till his dress was stuck to his skin. Upon seeing the pitiful state of the prisoner, El Chapo was visibly annoyed. He expected a useful asset, not a barely alive husk. "Why send me this mess? They should have just killed him," he muttered, his frustration evident. Days passed, and the man was left to languish in his agony, his condition worsening with each passing hour. His flesh began to rot, and a sickening stench permeated the camp. The guards, unable to ignore the putrid odor any longer, reported the situation to Guzman. Recognizing that the man was beyond saving and that his presence was no longer beneficial, Guzman gave a chilling command. His men were ordered to dig a grave. The prisoner, now barely clinging to life, was dragged to the edge of the open pit, and Guzman approached with a .25 caliber handgun in hand. The man, trembling and cowering on the ground, faced the inevitable. With a steely resolve, Guzman lifted his weapon, aimed it at the prisoner, and fired. This was just one example of many such brutalities rivals faced in the hands of the Sinaloa cartel. The Sinaloa cartel wasn't always as deadly as they were during the time of El Chapo. Not that they were saints or anything. They still did horrible things. However, the title of most brutal cartel ever goes to Los Zetas. This cartel is directly responsible for the surge of violence that plagued Mexico during the drug wars. Formed by deserters from the Mexican army's elite forces, Los Zetas brought military precision and brutality to the drug trade, setting a new standard for savagery that had a profound impact on the Mexican drug wars. Their reign of terror not only struck fear into the hearts of their enemies, but also compelled other cartels to adopt similarly violent tactics, escalating the conflict to unprecedented levels of brutality. Los Zetas emerged in the late 1990s as the enforcement arm of the Gulf Cartel. Originally composed of former Mexican Army commandos, their military training equipped them with advanced skills in combat, intelligence, and torture techniques. This background gave them a significant edge over rival cartels, both in terms of operational effectiveness and psychological warfare. From their inception, Los Zetas were known for their extreme violence. They introduced tactics that were shocking in their brutality, designed to intimidate both rivals and civilians. One of their most notorious notorious acts was the 2010 San Fernando massacre, where 72 immigrants from Central and South America were executed and dumped in a mass grave. This atrocity was followed by the discovery of another mass grave in 2011, containing 193 bodies, believed to be migrants who refused to cooperate with the cartel. The Zetas' methods of torture were equally horrifying. Victims were subjected to electric shocks, beatings, and dismemberment. In many cases, these acts of violence were recorded and circulated to instill fear. One particularly gruesome method involved feeding victims to exotic animals such as lions and tigers in front of an audience. Remember Heriberto Lascano? He was one of the cartel's most feared leaders, and this was his favorite method of torture and execution. The Zetas' strategy extended beyond physical violence. They mastered the art of psychological warfare, using fear as a weapon to control territories and subdue populations. They would hang mutilated bodies from bridges and billboards, leaving messages that warned others of the consequences of defiance. Just like that chilling instance when authorities found that body hanging from a bridge in Tijuana, with a note that read, "This is how all grasshoppers will be left." It's not quite clear who the word grasshoppers is referring to, but such displays were designed to send a clear message. Disobedience would be met with extreme and public retribution. The Zetas' violent reputation had a profound impact on the Mexican drug wars. Their brutality set a new benchmark for cruelty, forcing other cartels to follow suit to maintain their dominance and deterrence. The Sinaloa cartel, led by the infamous Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, began to adopt similar tactics. El Chapo's use of chainsaws for beheadings and his penchant for torturous interrogations were directly influenced by the Zetas' methods. For instance, that well-documented case of El Chapo ordering the torture of Israel Rincon, a rival cartel member. Imagine being tied to a chair, beaten, getting electrocuted, having your teeth pulled out, and falling unconscious, only to wake up and see a doctor who only revived for the torture to continue. Such was the fate of Israel Rincon. This method of prolonged suffering mirrored the Zetas' brutal tactics and was a clear sign of their influence. The influence of Los Zetas extended beyond individual cartels. Their actions created a cycle of escalation where each cartel sought to outdo the other in terms of brutality. This escalation was not just about instilling fear, but also about demonstrating power and control. The cartels understood that in the chaotic and violent landscape of the Mexican drug wars, a reputation for extreme violence could serve as both a deterrent and a recruitment tool. The Zetas' reign of terror had devastating effects on Mexican society. Their brutality led to widespread fear and insecurity, with entire communities caught in the crossfire. Migrants, in particular, became easy targets for exploitation and violence. The Zetas' involvement in human trafficking and their ruthless treatment of migrants highlighted the human cost of the drug wars. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Zetas' violent tactics eventually led to their downfall. Their brutality alienated potential allies and drew the ire of both Mexican and international law enforcement. Key leaders were captured or killed, and the cartel splintered into smaller, less organized factions. Heriberto Lascano, one of the most notorious leaders, was killed in a shootout with Mexican Marines in 2012. His death was a significant blow to the cartel, signaling a turning point in the fight against Los Zetas. However, the legacy of their violence continues to haunt Mexico, with many regions still grappling with the aftermath of their reign of terror. The decline of Los Zetas created a power vacuum in various regions across Mexico, especially in territories where they had maintained a strong presence. This weakening provided the Sinaloa cartel with an opportunity to expand its influence and control over these areas. As one of the most powerful and organized cartels, the Sinaloa cartel was well positioned to capitalize on the disarray within Los Zetas, seizing territory and market share in the drug trade. For the Sinaloa cartel, this territorial expansion meant greater access to strategic smuggling routes, particularly along the eastern and northeastern parts of Mexico, areas that were once dominated by Los Zetas. Torture to intimidate threats. The methods employed by cartels to maintain power and control often blur the lines between reality and horror. The Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo, have created a reputation through a chilling combination of brutality and strategic ruthlessness. Their reign of terror is characterized by the horrific activities at Ivan Archibaldo Guzman Salazar's ranch in western Mexico, a place where business rivals, law enforcement officials, and innocent victims met their grisly fates. At Ivan's ranch, the cartel's operatives executed orders with a ferocity designed to break both bodies and spirits. Business rivals were subjected to unimaginable torture, coerced into revealing secrets and information under duress. This was not a place where mercy was extended or where a swift death was granted. Instead, the victims endured prolonged suffering, their pain a tool for the cartel to extract every ounce of information possible. The Chapitos' methods went beyond physical torture. In a particularly horrifying instance, cartel henchmen used their captives to test the potency of fentanyl, a deadly synthetic opioid that the cartel was manufacturing and smuggling into the United States. One woman, deemed expendable, was repeatedly injected with a lower potency of fentanyl. Her death from an overdose was a calculated act of cruelty, a human experiment conducted to ensure the efficacy of their product. Another batch of fentanyl claimed the life of an addict used as a guinea pig. Despite this, the batch was still sent to the United States, showcasing the cartel's complete disregard for human life. The bodies of those who perished at the ranch were rarely given the dignity of a proper burial. Many were shot, but others faced a fate that belonged in nightmares. They were fed to the tigers that Ivan and his brother Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar kept as pets. These tigers, symbols of the brothers' power and savagery, consumed the remains of the victims, dead or alive. This macabre method of disposal served a dual purpose. It eliminated evidence and spread terror among the cartel's enemies. U.S. officials noted that such sadistic tactics were instrumental in the cartel's campaign to intimidate rivals and consolidate control over drug trafficking in Mexico. The Chapitos' grip on the drug trade extended across Mexico, with a particular focus on the lucrative fentanyl market. Under their leadership, the cartel achieved near-total control over the manufacturing and importation of fentanyl from Mexico into the United States. This dominance was maintained through a combination of sophisticated logistics and brutal enforcement. The Chapitos' reign of terror was not limited to business rivals. In 2017, their cruelty reached new heights with the capture, torture, and murder of two officials from the Office of the General Prosecutor. The first official was kidnapped from an airport and brought to Ivan's ranch. There, he was subjected to severe torture before being shot in the head. The second official endured even more gruesome treatment. After being brought to the ranch, cartel members brutalized him with a corkscrew, inserting hot chilies into the wounds. This barbaric method of torture was an example of the depths of the cartel's depravity. Eventually, he too was shot dead. The bodies of both officials were dumped unceremoniously near a highway, as a warning to anyone who dared to oppose the Chapitos. They understood that fear was a powerful weapon, one that could secure their dominance and deter any potential threats. Another example of how brutal cartels can be, especially to their rivals, is a detailed account of what the Gulf Cartel did to captured rivals belonging to Los Zetas. In the merciless world of Mexican drug cartels, chilling videos that surface from time to time showcase the gruesome fate of those who dare to cross these powerful organizations. One such video, posted on a popular cartel tracking blog, offers a harrowing glimpse into the violent feud between the Gulf Cartel and the Zetas. The 3-minute footage depicts a scene of cold-blooded savagery that is as haunting as it is revealing. The video opened with 5 shirtless men on their knees, their chests marked with large black Z's. These markings identified them as members of the Zetas cartel, a group notorious for its own brutal tactics. Surrounding these men were masked figures of the Gulf Cartel, each wielding a machete, the preferred instrument of their gruesome work. The scene was set for a grim spectacle of vengeance and intimidation. One by one, the Zeta prisoners were prompted to state their names for the camera. Each man's voice trembled as he spoke, aware that this might be his final moment. When asked who sent them, they each responded with Z40, referring to Miguel Angel Trevino Morales. At the time, he was the feared second-in-command of the Zetas. Morales, known within the cartel simply as 40, was a figure of infamy, with a $5 million U.S. bounty on his head at the time, and federal indictments in Texas for laundering cocaine profits through a horse racing venture. As the prisoners finished speaking, the voice behind the camera delivered a chilling proclamation. "You find yourselves here because you came to fuck us," he said, his tone filled with cold fury. "Pay attention, men." The camera shifted focus, and the true horror began. The Gulf Cartel members, their faces hidden behind masks, moved in on their captives. What followed next was a slow and bloody process as they began hacking off the prisoners' heads with machetes. The victims' pleas for mercy were ignored, their voices drowned out by the sounds of the brutal execution. The narrator's voice broke through the chaos, declaring, "This is how all your filthy people are going to end." It was a message meant to resonate far beyond the confines of that gruesome scene, and a warning to any who would challenge the Gulf Cartel. After more than a minute of this horrific display, the video concluded with the masked executioners holding up the severed heads of their victims for the camera. The narrator's voice once again cut through the silence, this time with a note of satisfaction. As if congratulating his men for a job well done, he said, "Very good, very good." There have been many such examples of cartels using brutal violence to intimidate rivals and instill fear among the populace. Their methods are often so gruesome that if it wasn't talked about, no one would even believe that humans were capable of such acts of violence. Bringing the horror to light. El Chapo's reign of terror didn't last forever as he would have wished. It was only a matter of time before justice caught up with him. In exchange for a lighter sentence, people who once worked for El Chapo did the one thing the kingpin despised above everything else: betrayal. Former associates of El Chapo came forward with confessions and witness accounts of the horrible things El Chapo did. One of them was something particularly chilling: the way he dealt with two Los Zetas members whom he claimed betrayed Sinaloa. This story involved a gun, a bonfire, and a stick. This bonfire brutality remains one of the most gruesome tales of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's reign as the head of the Sinaloa cartel. It all began when two men, alleged to be working for the rival Los Zetas cartel, were captured and delivered to Guzman by Damaso Lopez Nunez, a trusted lieutenant. Upon their arrival, Guzman turned to his security detail with a chilling remark about the gift they had received, referring to the two doomed men. Guzman first ordered his men to beat the captives in a shed and later in a more secluded area, but soon he decided it was his turn to personally administer their punishment. He requested a large stick, something akin to a long branch, and when it was brought to him, he began torturing the men with brutal force. The captives were beaten mercilessly until they resembled rag dolls, their bodies broken and bones fractured to the point where they could no longer move. Guzman was relentless, striking them repeatedly and ensuring their suffering was prolonged. But the stick was not the only weapon he wielded that night. "How is it possible you're working for those people and you're betraying us?" he demanded, his rage fueled by their perceived treachery. To Guzman, these men were guilty of the ultimate sin, working for a rival cartel instead of pledging their loyalty to him, especially since they hailed from his home state of Sinaloa. After the savage beating, Guzman ordered 2 ATVs and had the barely conscious victims slung over the vehicles and delivered to a roaring bonfire. The sight of the flames seemed to terrify the men, and their fear only intensified as Guzman approached. With cold precision, he put the barrel of his rifle up to the first man's skull, uttered a final curse, calling him a mother, and pulled the trigger. The same grim fate awaited the second man, who was executed in the same manner. Guzman then instructed his men to dispose of the bodies in the bonfire. He wanted no trace of them left behind, no bones or remains that could speak of the horrors that had transpired. Throughout the night, his men tended to the fire, ensuring that every fragment of bone was ground up and consumed by the flames. By morning, they assured their boss that the job was complete, that nothing remained of the men who had dared to betray him. This event, like many others, illustrated the extreme lengths to which El Chapo would go to maintain his grip on power and instill fear in his enemies. But what other reason could there be for cartel brutality, you may ask? The answer is simple: fear factor, of instilling fear in people through actual acts of terrorism. For Mexican drug cartels, overt displays of brutality have become a defining feature of their modus operandi. This strategy, steeped in bloodshed and terror, serves to generate fear among authorities, rivals, and the general populace. Blood, in this dark realm, is a sign of power, and no cartel understood this better than the once dominant Zetas. The Zetas cartel, now mostly extinct, were pioneers of a new era of bloodshed in the drug trafficking history of Mexico. They introduced the world to high-impact atrocities that sent shockwaves through the nation. Their tactics included dismembering bodies, dissolving corpses in acid, and hanging mutilated remains from bridges in capital cities. These gruesome displays were designed to intimidate adversaries and mark their territory with an unmistakable message of dominance. Drug traffickers in Mexico often boast about their killings through such horrifying displays. Barbarism for them is a scene of power, and blood is the ultimate symbol of their reign. This violent theater of cruelty is not unique to Mexico, but follows a similar script used by terrorist organizations around the globe. For over a decade, cartels have employed public banners and signs, known as narco messages, to send scary warnings and assert their control. These narco messages are typically scrawled on white blankets, some more elaborately produced than others, often filled with spelling errors and signed by the person or group claiming responsibility. Almost always, these messages are displayed next to corpses or body parts, amplifying their gruesome impact. The intent behind these messages is clear: to instill fear, assert dominance, and communicate threats to rivals and authorities alike. The brutality exhibited by the cartels serves a tactical purpose as well. By creating high-impact events, they aim to heat up the plaza, a term used in cartel slang to describe generating enough chaos to draw in public security forces. This tactic disrupts rival operations by forcing government forces to focus on a particular area, thereby leaving other regions uncovered and ripe for cartel activities. Massacres and high-profile acts of violence are often orchestrated solely to achieve this strategic advantage. The two most powerful cartels in Mexico, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel, CJN, have honed this tactical strategy to perfection. The turf war between them is not just against each other, but also against government security forces. While the CJN is notorious for its nationwide gruesome killings, the Sinaloa cartel has leveraged different alliances, making them less overtly bloody, but no less dangerous. Despite their different approaches, both cartels understand the power of fear. The CJN's brutal massacres and Sinaloa's strategic alliances both serve to establish their dominance and maintain control over lucrative drug trafficking routes. The public displays of violence and narco messages are not random acts of cruelty, but calculated moves designed to achieve specific tactical goals. As long as these tactics prove effective, the cycle of violence will continue, fueled by the cartel's unrelenting quest for dominance. The chilling reality is that in the world of Mexican drug cartels, bloodshed and brutality are not just tools of terror, but essential elements of their strategy to rule through fear. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check our other similar and amazing videos on the screen. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.